Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is actually taken from my brand new production course. So I finally dropped my own production course. It is around my song I Told You. That's what the whole course is based upon. I review I Told You. I talk about step by step how I made every single part of the song, starting from the initial idea, all the break synths, the vocal, the drop synths. Everything regarding the production, mixing, and mastering is included in this course. There's 3 hours worth of content where I talk about not only the how, but the why, which I think is very, very important. The link for the course will be down below in the description if you guys are interested. I do appreciate anybody that chooses to support. I think you guys will find tremendous value from this course and from today's video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So let's go down to the break. Let's chat a bit about what's going on. So first, let's just start with the main synths in the break here. So really massive synth section. I love it. I love the creepiness in the beginning, and then obviously when the big leads come in, I'm a big fan. And I think because this is a faster structure, to me it's just interesting. I really like it. Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked here. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on. Well, first you can see that we have the vocal chop, we've got the vibey chords, we've got the backing synth, we've got the TOU accent synth. This stands for Two of Us. ARP, and then we got a tension string for the second break. For the bass, we got Reese Brother. This is a really big Reese bass. And then we got the dirty bass for the big synth section. And then, of course, up top here, you can see leads, chant, layer. All right, so I think let's start with the vocal chop. And I actually have to bring you in a different project real quick because in this project, it's just the audio. I'll show you exactly where this vocal chop came from. Okay, so I'm here in an earlier project just to showcase the vocal chop because I did have to delete it in order to make space for other things later down the line. So anyway, here is how the vocal chop was made. Again, it's from Arcade, just like the actual vocal itself. This time it's from a pack called Misunderstood out of the Hooked line. And this one's actually really simple. This is me being very work smarter, not harder. You know what I'm saying? But this is literally just on G the whole time. No slices, no real chops. Literally just playing G the whole time. You can see if you hold it for too long, it just repeats. So you can see that I sliced it up after each bar. And then cut this right here just to give it that little bit of space. So ever so slightly making some altercations to the melody itself. But let's talk about how I processed it, right? With no processing, it sounds like this, which is really dull and boring in my opinion. So the first order of business when I decided to process this vocal chop rather, was the fact that it was so dull, right? Super dull. And one way I like to brighten up sounds is with DST. This is a really great plugin. I believe it's multi-band distortion if I'm not mistaken, but honestly, I like to use it as an EQ. So I'll come down here to where it says low, low mid, and high. And I kind of just boost these knobs again as if it's an EQ. And it nets a different result than if you did this with an EQ. Because it's distortion, you're getting extra harmonics and just overall a different sound. And I really like using it. It's a great plugin. And this is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. If I play the vocal chop and then add the DST, you can see what exactly it's doing. So really taking a sound that's lifeless and breathing a lot of life into it. Well, next up, speaking of life, we got to really get the atmosphere going and make this thing really come to life. The whole idea, theme of this song is just like arena, right? This vocal chop has a similar set of processing when it comes to the atmosphere. And in this case, it's done with delay and supermassive. So these are both pretty, extreme delays and reverbs, also done directly on the insert. So in this case, we have a tape delay, quarter note. Really, really great delay. Again, I love delays, but we also have a supermassive. Supermassive is interesting. It's kind of like a reverb, but it's also got some delay in it, and it's really extreme. It's a really, honestly, a great plugin, and it's free. And a wise man once said, if it's free, it's for me. But in all seriousness, this combined with the delay just creates such an awesome atmosphere. With the reverb and delay, it really brings you to this other space, whereas without it, it's a cool sound, it's a cool little riff, but it doesn't really transport me anywhere. And that's something that I try to achieve a lot in my productions. I want to take the listener on a journey, and reverb and delay is just a great way to do that, especially if you're trying to bring them on a big journey, right? These plugins make your productions sound really big and arena-esque. So lastly, for the chain of processing on this vocal chop, we have Fat Filter Pro Q3, and I'm just cutting off some of the lows. I'm actually cutting a decent amount of the lows off, and I have this dynamic EQ that's just addressing this annoying frequency here, which is just brutal. But this dynamic EQ is great. It's nice because it is a bit more transparent than a static cut. So whenever I'm addressing rogue frequencies, I think it's really easy to just, create a tight cue and just pull it all the way down. But sometimes that will give your sound this like nasally artificial sound depending on what area of the frequency spectrum you're adjusting. So I personally started doing the harsh like frequency taming with dynamic EQ because it's only taking away what it needs and it's keeping everything else in there, right? So if I were to play the signal, you can see that initial like, it's really pulling the frequency down all the way to around -9 dB. And then after that, it's chilling around like -3 or -6, somewhere in that region. So it's a lot more transparent than it just being a static cut, which is why I like to use dynamic EQ. So that's all the processing on the vocal chop. Let's go back to that main project. Alrighty, folks, so we are back in the main production project, and I think this is a good time to tell you guys, in case you didn't know, I produce in 2 stages. I make all of the music in one project, and then after I'm done with my production project, I bounce everything into audio or into stems, and I bring it into a new project where I do the mixing and mastering. So if you guys didn't already know that, well, now you know. But this is the main production project, so this is not the final master. But I did show you guys how that vocal chop was created, and now we can go ahead and talk about the rest of the break and how that was all created. So first, you can see here we got what I call the vibey chords, and I mean, listen to this. Really, really awesome sound. First, let's talk about the MIDI notes themselves. Well, this is the chord progression for the break and for the whole entire track pretty much. I have pretty much just variations of this G, D sharp, C progression for the whole entire track. Sometimes it's nice to use the same chords and bass progression that the drop is playing in your break so that you can kind of guarantee that sort of cohesion. Sometimes I hear in amateur productions, like, they'll just use the most wildly different chords for their break and completely different chords for their drop, and there's no sense of cohesion. This is a safe bet to do that, but the downside is that it can get a little repetitive. I think in the case of I Told You, it works because the record is so fast-paced and there's always a dramatic change happening. If you're going to work with, say, more melodic music, like progressive house with longer arrangements, you can definitely still do, have one main progression throughout the whole entire track. There's been many successful tracks where it's one big progression. Sometimes you'll get examples, though, where the progression can maybe change in, say, the pre-chorus. So you'll have a verse and then a pre-chorus with a different progression. And then coming into the chorus or the hook of the song where the vocal is singing, you can have a new progression. And that new progression will typically be the one that's playing in the drop. In any case, for I Told You, I did opt to make the same progression play the whole entire track. Now, for the notes themselves, I actually didn't run with basic triads. I kind of did a version of power chords. So you can see here, like, I have G and D, I have G, G, D, and then D sharp, A sharp, D, and then C, G, C. Now, how did I come up with this progression? Because typically, if I had this bass line, I would usually opt for basic triads, and that would sound something like this: G, A sharp, D, right? So we got G minor, and then D sharp major, and then C minor. That would sound like this. Which, to me, it just has too much harmony. I wanted this to be really creepy. And a lot of times when you're going for a darker vibe, I think less harmony is better. So here's what I did. You can see that I started by removing this middle harmony here. That gives me a little bit more of a desirable result. So I decided to do that over here, and I decided to do that over here. So you can see without that middle harmony in the triad, it just sounds a little bit more mysterious, a little bit more, again, like creepy. The one thing I didn't like about this, though, was that the top melody played D, A sharp, G. This is something that I always pay attention to, and you guys should as well. You should really pay attention to what the top melody of your chord progression is playing, meaning the top uppermost notes of your chord progression. So to me, if we played D, and then A sharp, and then G, it sounds cool, but to me, it sounds even meaner if it was D, D sharp, C. So in order to achieve my desired top melody, it was very simple. I just took these two notes and brought it down an octave, and now I just have an inverted version of the chord that I already had, but now it has my desired top melody, which is cool. So that's how I came up with the chord progression itself. And for the sound, it comes from Analog Lab. It's a sound called Bouncy Bells. And let's check out the processing. Let's see what's going on here. So with nothing on it, it sounds like this. So already a really cool sound. The first order of business was removing the high end. I didn't like that bell texture that it had in the upper register of the frequency spectrum, but I loved everything below around 1K, which is why I made this cut. So this is, again, not a mixing decision, but a sound design decision. So with this cut, it sounds like this now. And we're like pretty much there already, right? In terms of the final sound. I used Focus 1 to beef it up a little bit. You can see that we're going with focus on the extreme setting. If you guys have this plugin, if you tap this exclamation point, it basically just does this times 10. Focus is kind of like OTT. It's a compression that shapes the sound and makes it brighter. I'm also adding a little bit of drive and a little bit of width. Next, I have another EQ. And this is shaping the sound a little bit. So I guess technically this would be a mixing decision. What I did was I made a cut at around 145 to reduce the amount of lows that were happening. And then I also reinforced this cut that I originally did to make sure that nothing was really bleeding over. And that sounds like this now. And then I have OTT 58%. Also reducing some of the highs here. And I remember this decision. This was literally just to bring out the tail of this chord sound more. I felt like I was getting a lot of attack and not enough body or release in the sound. So using OTT and just squeezing the whole sound together, I felt like gave me a more solid sound all around. These last two plugins here, Balance and Simplon, you guys are going to see these a lot. I use Balance for my volume automation whenever I want something to hard cut, and then I always use Simplon for filtering. Not always, but most of the time. Cool, so those are the vibey chords. You combine that with the vocal chop, and we get... I think that sounds so dope. And what I want to highlight here for you guys right now is pay attention how with just two sounds, right? There's not even layers going on. It's just the vocal chop from Arcade, the vibey chords from Analog Labs. With two sounds, you're able to create a clear theme, a clear idea, and a clear vibe, for lack of a better word, right? So the reason I'm explaining this is because I know from personal experience and talking with some younger producers as well. I know that sometimes you kind of just add sounds, add sounds, add sounds, trying to find that feeling, right? That magic feeling that us producers are always on the search for. But the problem with that is that I think when you start crowding too many sounds and too many plugins, it becomes too cluttered. You're never gonna find that magic that way. I think you should spend time finding one sound, two sounds that are really high quality, that have that feeling that you're looking for, before moving on to trying other sounds and layers and all that stuff, right? So you want to have that feeling right away. You don't want to build out your track wasting all this time adding layers and stuff if you don't even have that feeling from the main ingredients, right? So now let's talk about some of the supporting cast.